Hey, Redesigning Health and Home. It's Carrie. Meg is cheering us on from the sidelines today. And today I am introducing our very first guest for the new year 2026. And our guest is Linda Durack. Linda holds a master's in conflict resolution, is a mediator, and offers coaching services as well. She's an adjunct faculty member at Dominican University. And she also is a small business entrepreneur. And she's also one of my great friends. So it is a honor and a privilege to have you with us today, Linda. So, how are things over in your neck of the woods today?
Well, I'm glad to say the sun's out today, so that's always a good thing. Good way to start the new year, right?
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for having me on your show today. I really appreciate the opportunity about conflict and mediation.
People might hear the words conflict and immediately because most of us, let's be honest, don't care for conflict. A lot of us avoid it. And so might hear that term and be a little bit already off put by, oh, this is about conflict. This conflict scares me. I don't know. I don't know if I want to hear about this, but I think it's just so important because we can never avoid it completely in our lives. And so I thought it might be interesting to start out with how you got started with conflict resolution work, and then maybe we'll define some of the terms within conflict.
Sure. So, how I got started for years was in small business, my husband and I working together. And then we had an opportunity for that to transition. And I was still at a point in my life where I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. And I started to think about when I was running this small business, what did I like most about it? Well, I liked most about being in the stuff, the problems between vendors and customers, between employees and each other, between us and our provider. And that led me down this search of conflict management, conflict resolution. And that's when I learned about this whole world of ADR, which means alternative dispute resolution, which led me then into a master's at Dominican University on mediation and conflict resolution, which that's been over 10 years now, which has allowed me to do mediation in many facilities across many different types of mediation, which we can talk about later, and also do some coaching to help people get more clarity around conflict, how it's impacting them, and how they can behave in a conflict.
Mhm.
What I thought might be helpful is to give folks an idea about the real values and benefits of conflict, because I think, as you mentioned, people want to shy away from it, right? They don't want to deal with conflict. And really, if you think of conflict as a way of gaining insight and information, not only about yourself, but about the other person or people that you might be in conflict with, because it really reveals to us what matters to people. It also helps us understand where their boundaries are. It also helps us understand when our needs or their needs are not being met. And it also creates a space for conversations to happen. So if we can reframe our relationship to conflict, we can have more productive results or outcomes in the process of trying to understand the conflict, how it's impacting us, and how we would like things to be different.
That's very interesting because as soon as you said that, it made me think of conflict in from the perspective of misunderstanding or not having enough information about what it is that's driving the other person's reaction or response or lack of reaction, whatever that might be. And that by trying to have a calm conversation, really getting to the bottom of what is it that you want, what is it that I want, and how can we, negotiate some kind of compromise or whatever that might be. So
Right.
that's very helpful just right there. So what how would you define a conflict? Is it a power struggle? Is it a misunderstanding? How would you?
So there's no single answer to that, right? But some of the
Mhm.
reasons that conflicts occur, I'll give a whole list of them. Differences in needs and interests. So
Mhm.
needs and interests are the foundation of conflict. This is some terminology here, but people, when they're in conflict, they talk about their position. Their position is the thing that they want,
Mhm.
right? I want I want the windows rolled up on the car while we're driving. That's
Mhm.
the driver. The passenger, I want the windows rolled down. So their position is windows up or windows down. Their need and interest is the reasons why for those things. The
Uh,
driver wants the windows up because the cold air was distracting him. He wasn't able to focus. The passenger wants the windows down because the cold air was keeping them awake so that they could keep the driver awake. So we're not talking about windows up and windows down. We're talking about the reasons that we want those things. And getting to those reasons is the essence, is that's where the hard work is, because that means being vulnerable, that means exposing things, that means deciding how much you're going to allow yourself to get clear on what's important to you, as well as acknowledge what might be important for the other side.
right, right.
So we also have reasons why conflict happens that we have different interpretations of the same situations. We've seen that. We have conflict over limits of resources.
Mhm.
We have conflicts because communication breaks down. We have conflicts that happen just because our emotions are running high, so we're lacking sort of some emotional control here and
Yeah.
emotional intelligence, and then things spiral out of hand. We have conflicts because of unmet expectations. We have conflicts because of difference in values or priorities, and also conflicts because our past experiences has informed
Mm,
us about the way things have been. And so
mm,
why would I believe it's going to be any different going forward? So in life, any number of those things can contribute to our status in a conflict. And then the degree that it escalates it happens to connect to usually how important it is to us or how much pinch we're feeling, how much pain we're
yeah.
feeling, right?
Yeah,
There's a lot of conflicts we just go, it's not important to me.
right,
I let
right,
it go. And I let it go, and I let it go, and I let it go until I can't let it go, and then the emotions begin, and now we're into the whole thing.
right, right. So, is it more difficult if you find it hard to communicate? Like if you're maybe not super great, super confident in your communication skills, or is it more about the willingness to be vulnerable and just have the conversation?
Yeah, so I teach this at Dominican University, and unfortunately, there's no one way to approach the conflict, and you also have to always be aware of how vulnerable you want to be because the intention that you're bringing to the table could be different than what the other party is bringing. And what
Mm.
you're viewing as you're sharing information, you're seeing it as a tool. They
Mhm.
could decide to turn it into a weapon,
Mm,
right?
right.
So information is power, but that power can be used to support and build, or it can be used to destroy and deteriorate. And
Mm,
so you have to decide. So my answer to somebody is not share everything, tell everything that you know, feel
right.
all the feels. You have to decide in each situation, is this the right place for this to happen? And
Um,
one of the ways that you decide that, this is getting into sort of the fun part of mediation work. One of the ways you decide that is that you always are assessing your BATNAs and your WATNAs, right? So, Carrie, do you know what your BATNA is? Your BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right?
mm,
So, if you and I are in a conflict and we are sitting here talking about it, and I may be showing a little bit of, maybe I'm exposing a little bit, right? Because I have trust with you, we have a good relationship, so I'm going to expose a little bit. But I'm also going to be thinking about if I don't resolve this with Carrie here today, what's my plan B?
mm,
What do I do outside of that? So, if my plan B is good, like I'm happy to go to my plan B, then I don't have to work real hard with you, right?
mm,
I don't have
right.
to give a lot up. But if my plan B is bad, like it's the worst thing that could happen, then I'm going to work harder to stay here at the table with you.
Right.
And so part of mm, resolving a conflict is deciding, here I am in this person, here is this conflict. Are there other ways that I can solve this conflict that might be outside of this person?
Mhm.
And then what's the viability, feasibility, durability, sustainability of those as compared to staying here and working on this conflict?
You just reminded me of a movie that my husband and I just went and watched. Have you seen Marty Supreme? Did you go to that
Oh, I
movie?
just went this weekend and saw that. Yeah.
Yes. And, is it Mr. Wonderful who is kinda like the not so great guy? And he has all the power, right? Like, he
Yeah.
doesn't really need anything from Marty. Marty is desperate. He needs like, he's got everything to lose, right? And so, he had no negotiating power, which
Correct.
which is what strikes me when you talk about just that scenario that you mentioned right there is who has the power, who doesn't, do you even have any power to negotiate? So I think what I'm getting to here is I'm hoping you're going to share maybe some simple steps with us. I realize that this is an entire degree, so we're not going to
Yeah.
get to it all today. But if people were to, really listen and take to heart the steps that you talk about today, what might they learn that would help them in, just in conflict day to day?
Right. So, some things that everybody can use in their day to day life, right? When it comes to any kind of conflict. First off, the most important thing is this relationship between positions and needs and interests.
Mhm.
So, if everybody just can walk away from this time that we're spending together, understanding that underlying that conflict, there's a pinch. There's a pinch to something that I value or something that is important to me. And if I can get clear on what that pinch is, I have a better way to move forward because I'm not solving for the position of it. When you solve for positions, you have winners and losers,
Mm.
right? Because I need this, I need A, and you also need A, which means that only one of us is going to win here because we can't divide A in half, right? We can't get
Okay.
half of A
Right.
because we're solving for the position. When we start to solve for the needs and interests, we're solving for I have I can't take any more time off of work. I can't afford to be sick. I need to have extra income for an unexpected bill. I can't make that payment because I haven't received your rent payment. Like the reasons when we stop for you have to pay me rent or I can't pay you rent, we don't get anywhere. But if we solve for other things that are the reasons why I cannot then pay my taxes, the building is going to be taken from me, all of these complicated things, we can start talking about more ideas or options about how we can solve. And now we can solve for my needs and interests, and we can solve for your needs and interests because our needs and interests do not have to be the same. But when we're solving for positions, we're solving for one or the other because we're going
Mm.
from a win-lose to a win-win. So
Well,
solving for needs and interests allows us to get to a win-win.
and I would assume that most conflict that people would have, maybe like within their own family, would probably fall into that second category, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the issue with the family stuff is that they bring their history, and so, I said, what are the reasons for conflict? Because past experience has informed us. Well, you've always done this and you've always done that. Well, you have to be willing to believe that somebody can behave differently.
Mm.
You have to
Right.
give them the benefit of the doubt if you want to avoid the conflict from escalating or taking it to court or, going whatever the next scenario might be. So understanding that the pinch that you're feeling around the conflict has an underlying need and interest attached to that. That need and interest is probably aligned somewhere with your own value system. And if
Uh-huh.
you can get clarity around that, then you can have more complex, meaningful discussions around ways that that pinch can be addressed and bring more things to the table to discuss. And the things that we bring to the table are called options. So if I go back to the windows up and windows down in the car, that's the easiest one. When we're solving for just windows up and windows down, there's only two options, right? But let's make the driver who wants the windows down because he wants the fresh air, because they're in the countryside. He grew up in the countryside. He loves the smell of the farmland, because the cool breeze is refreshing, because it's keeping them awake. The passenger wants the windows up because they have a chill. They were sick last week. They missed work. They can't afford to miss any work. They're not going to make their rent if they're out of work. So now we're not talking about windows up and windows down. We're talking about being alert, driving safely, smelling fresh air, not getting sick, being able to pay my rent, not missing work. What
Mhm.
happens to this conversation now? It's just expanded tenfold.
Sure.
Right? So how do we solve us two, we're in the car together, Care. How do we solve for my need to have the windows up and your need to have the windows down? Well, what are some options? Could you put a sweater on that's in the trunk of the car? Could we pull over and walk around for a while, enjoy the smells of the countryside? Could we get to the nearest road stop and both stretch our legs? Could the other person drive for a bit? Could we turn the air on the passenger side, but the windows on the driver's side? I just gave you 4 or 5 options, which had nothing to do with just windows up and windows down.
Right. Right.
And so when we start solving for needs and interests, we can each come up with ideas that will solve for our own needs and interests, but more importantly, things that are we can consider for the needs and interests of the other person.
Uh-huh.
And when we start to think about what is important for the other person and how we can participate in finding a solution for that, that's how we build durable, sustainable solutions.
I love that example because I think it would be very easy to be just like, well, you're always so difficult. You always want things your way. Or, teenagers, they always have to be so difficult. But if you only ever stay at that very surface level and don't dig down, now everybody's just annoyed, right? And you don't get anywhere.
Well, and you know what happens in that is that another really useful tool is this idea of reframing. So we use language that is loaded, like teenagers,
Mhm.
or you never listen to anything I say. That's a loaded piece of language, right? That's saying a
Yeah.
lot in there. It's like talking to a wall, I'm just done. I'm not doing this anymore. You don't listen to anything I say.
Uh-huh.
That's you and I in a negotiation or in a meeting or in a conflict right now. Okay. Hmm. If I'm listening to a person talk to me like that, I want to reframe that in a way that unpacks what's all loaded in there,
Uh-huh.
right? Because we can't get past that because the language is too loaded and we're starting to build up our wall. So we've got to break it down to what is the person really trying to say. And I think what they're really trying to say is it sounds like being heard is really important to you. It sounds like you would really like some more meaningful dialogue between us.
Right.
And that's getting to the core of what you think the party is saying when they're saying, you just don't listen to me.
Right. Right. One is shutting it down and the other one is opening up the
Opening it up.
opportunity. Yes. Yep.
Opening it up. And that's not easy to do when you're in the heat of a conflict with somebody directly, but if your conflict got to the point that you felt like, wow, this relationship is important and we need to resolve this, a mediator will be very useful in helping reframe things so that parties can continue to open up and expand and hear. But
Mm.
knowing that as a tool for an individual, if you can reframe, if you find yourself saying to somebody, you always do that. You did that same thing again. Well, what is really going on for me? Why am I saying that? Well, I'm saying that because I'm not feeling valued. I'm not
Yeah.
feeling heard. I'm not feeling respected. It's tied back to something. And if you
Right.
can identify that, I'm having a reaction right now because I'm not feeling like you're taking my words seriously or
Right.
with intention or that you're devaluing me. And that's a
Mhm.
lot different than I'm done with you.
Yeah. Right. For sure. I'm thinking to some of the work that you've done, because you've worked with CASA. What does CASA stand for?
A
Quite
court appointed special advocate.
right. And so you're there to support children who are
Mhm.
in the system and maybe don't have somebody to advocate for them. And when I think about situations like that, it makes me think of the party that seemingly has no power versus the party who has all the power, right? Because we could be in situations like that where, maybe we are stuck in a situation where we can't pay the rent and we don't have family to help us and we don't have, like, there are no other options. And so it seems like the person, the landlord has all the power and we have none. So in that situation, is there a way to reach out to a mediator or can you somehow even mediate for yourself
Mhm,
if you feel
mhm.
like you have no power?
Yeah. Well, so let me share with you, for your listeners, about the organization Center for Conflict Resolution. It is a not for profit mediation organization in the city of Chicago that takes on mediation cases between individuals, between communities, between businesses. Um, and the cost to the participants is nothing. It's a non for
Mhm.
profit. There's funding that comes through a lot of um, fundraising. And there's an opportunity then to work with a professional mediator and address what's going on and hopefully walk away with some kind of movement. Can't guarantee a solution, but some kind of movement. And so, what a mediator can do that might be difficult for an individual to do uh, is to create balance at the mediation table. When one, if it's a, let's just use landlord tenant as a good example. It always feels, as particularly in the state of Illinois, like landlords have a lot more power than the tenants do.
Mhm.
And if we break it down to the actual legal aspects of it, if rent's not paid and the building's not falling apart, they probably do.
Mhm.
But when you're in a mediation, you have the opportunity to talk not just about the fact that rent is due and rent's not paid, but what are the reasons around that? Maybe it's been a long term tenant who, for 5 years, was very consistent with rent, and this past year has been inconsistent.
Mhm.
And the lines of communication have shut down. And so the landlord had no recourse except to take them to court. Right.
Right.
So now they find themselves at a mediation table outside of the courtroom, and there's a space that gets created by the mediator where parties can explain what has happened and there can be consideration. And if there's enough belief in the foundation of the relationship, the landlord might be willing to work with this person and create payment plans, create a schedule, create a generous timeline for them to move out if that's what they decide needs to happen. But that's a whole different process than just going in front of the judge and having the judge, yeah, rent wasn't paid, therefore you have to get out and you owe this money.
Right, right. You actually have somebody helping you through the process and
Yeah, yeah, helping expand the communication because here's the interesting part about mediation work. We're not lawyers. Well, that's wrong. There are many people that are mediators that are lawyers, but when you are at the mediation table, you are a mediator and your understanding of the law isn't really that relevant
right.
because we're not here to solve things from a legal perspective. We're here to solve them for the underlying needs and interests of both parties.
Mhm.
So I've been in many mediations where parties are represented by counsel and their attorneys will start all the legalese. And I get to say, great, great. That's not what we do here, though. The legal
Right.
stuff happens in that room. And here, we're just having conversations. We're trying to get clear around what's important for folks.
Right.
So if somebody finds themselves in the need for a mediation, I would advise and encourage to contact the Center for Conflict Resolution in the city of Chicago. They do in person mediations, they do remote mediations. And it's a very, very wonderful organization that allows people to really deal with issues that can be difficult that they can't advance on their own without having to get into a full court scenario, you know?
That's awesome. I didn't even know that that existed, and we'll definitely include a link to that website so people can access it if they need to. Is there a particular demographic of people that you enjoy working with more than another?
No, for me, I really I enjoy all types of cases with all types of people,
Mhm.
young and old, and it's people are fascinating.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
Yes.
Um, I have done cases over the years. We were talking about CASA for a while, so I was a CASA for over 12 years, but kind of running in tandem with that on a separate program, I was also mediating in abuse and neglect court out in Kane County. And these cases were very, very interesting because they would often be 6, 8, 10, even 12 people. And this was a co mediation model. And we would have natural parents, foster parents, social workers, CASA workers, potentially attorneys, and all here for the best interests of children that have been taken from their home, for safety reasons, security
Right.
reasons. But basically, communication amongst all these people has just fallen apart.
Sure.
It's just everybody's just got the walls up and nothing is moving forward. And the children are only supposed to be kind of out of their sort of permanent home for about 18 months. Something has to happen to move them into permanency. And nothing has happened because of these obstacles. So the judge calls them to go to mediation. So we do these sessions with, again, large groups of people, and it's super valuable work because the value of mediation is that you get to hear directly from the other person how they have been impacted by the situation, by the actions, by the lack of actions. And when people can speak from their authentic voice, you can hear it, you
Uh-huh.
feel it and hear it, and then that creates space for somebody to find sort of humanity and decency and then stay engaged and work together. I said in the beginning there's different types of mediation. The work that I do is defined as facilitative mediation.
Uh-huh.
And what that means is that I'm just facilitating, right? I have no answers. Well, I have all the answers, of course, but I can't give any of them.
Right.
Kidding. I in facilitated mediation, the role of the mediator is to strictly expand the conversation, help people hear each other. And you do that through active listening and asking questions to help them expand what's going on for them and then start talking to each other. The more I can get parties talking to each other, the better the mediation will move forward because they're working things out, right?
Mm, uh-huh.
So, in facilitative mediation, you are all together for a period of time, kind of working on your topics of discussions, like getting all these balls in the air. You get all this stuff going. And before you want to kind of settle in and start talking about optioning or these sort of solutions approach, you then meet privately with your small groups and check in. Is there anything else that you wanted to explore? Anything else we should be taking care of? And in that one on one, they can be more vulnerable and really show or express things that they think might work for them or not work for them, and you help them process how to
Right.
move forward.
Right. It sounds like incredibly meaningful and rewarding work for sure.
Yeah.
Just, so if there's a conflict with your husband or your children, are they like, oh boy,
Yeah.
mom's a mediator. I don't stand a chance.
Well, no, unfortunately, they don't. They don't say that. But when I was in school and probably in the beginning when I was starting my mediation work, because it's like anything else, it's a muscle and you have to build it,
Sure.
right? And my kids at that point would have been teenagers. And so we'd be sitting at the dining room table. And the fun part about being in school is I could bring topics to the dinner table that we could talk about, which was always fun and interesting. But then it got to the point and they'd be like, Mom, could you stop conflict resoluting us? I'm like, okay, yes. We'll see.
That's a fair request.
Well, I guess some of the nice parts now about that experience or kind of maybe maybe my learning happening while they were growing up is that they'll come to me now and say, "Hey, I've got this conflict," or "This is going on. Do you have ideas?" So we actually get to talk kind of strategically about how
Mhm.
they can move through whatever that conflict is about or how they can support somebody else, in their experience. Mhm.
What a great mom gift to have.
Yeah, it's been a good one. I wish, and believe me, I wish I had known all that I know now when I was running my business, right? Like,
Right. I've got a couple questions here that I wanted to ask you. This is probably more, I would say, conflict again, like within your own family or maybe your marriage. I'm thinking about body language and how
yeah,
much that maybe plays or doesn't play into it. Maybe you know how to unpack it, but I'm thinking of like the arms crossed and avoiding eye contact and um I'm sure you can read a lot from that. uh, for me, if I were to see that, I would think, oh, that person is angry or has shut down or refuses to talk. Tell me, what kind of role does that play within trying to figure out how to talk to somebody if they're doing that to you?
yeah, that's a great question, Care. And I think it's a significant role. And one of the things that you said is that I see it and I might make some assumptions about what that body language means.
Uh-huh.
And the reality of it is that you have no idea what their body language
Right.
means.
Mhm.
So if you don't know, what would you do?
Well, other than making assumptions, talking to you, my guess is the correct answer is to ask about it, or say
Sure.
something like, it seems like you're feeling really attacked or you're feeling really defensive. Maybe ask about that.
Yeah, or it could be yes, 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 yes. And instead of even naming that, it could be as simple as saying, I notice every time we talk about this, you turn away.
Mm,
I notice that when I bring up this subject, your eyes roll back. Like all that you have to do is name your observation and just lay it there and see what the person does with it.
right.
Right. So here's an example. this is even more difficult to take care of body language on Zoom or whatever media you're using
Right.
for your virtual meetings. But a lot of my work now in mediation is in a virtual format. So I'm missing a lot of cues,
Mhm.
particularly depending on where and how people are holding their cameras and whatnot. So I'm in this session and I've got a adult daughter and mother, and it was about children. And it was going well, except then I noticed that the adult daughter, whenever the mom started talking, she would just turn her head. And I thought, I'm just watching this because when I was talking, the daughter would look right at the camera. Whenever the mom was talking, the daughter would turn the head.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, if I was in person, I would be naming this, but it seems a little bit weird, but okay, I'm gonna, and let's just call her Mary. So Mary, I noticed that every time your mom is speaking, that you're turning your head. I'm expecting that she's gonna say, I'm so angry at her, I can't even listen to her. Like I'm expecting all of this loaded stuff. And
Right.
she said, I'm just having a really hard time hearing her. So I'm just turning my head to hear better.
Oh, wow. Right. Right, so making assumptions is probably not a great thing to do then. Do the techniques of conflict resolution change depending on the age of the people involved or the relationship to the people involved or between the people involved?
Yes, yes. So let's talk about age for a minute. So I just do this from the perspective of the mediator, but I think this would apply also if you were a person trying to resolve a conflict with a younger person, a
Right.
child. I've done a number of juvenile cases where a juvenile has caused some harm, but they are being sort of diverted out of the traditional penal system and they are going through some therapy and they are doing mediation and, they might even have to do some circle keeping, different ways that but
Mm.
they have opportunities to sort of get on track.
Right.
And so imagine you've got a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, and they have broken into a house or they have stolen something or
Mhm.
whatever. Likelihood of them being very verbal and owning up. Yeah, I mean, they'll say, yeah, I did it, but they will give you one word answers.
Yes.
It's not a conversation. So the way you have to approach with the younger person is often kind of a series of questions to just get them to feel safe, to be able to start talking because they don't want to expose. You're some stranger from the outside who means nothing to them. They're here because they have to be, but
Right.
they're there with their parent or whoever their guardian is, and there's a likelihood that their parent is hearing some details now that they didn't hear before.
Right.
And an example of that will be, I had a 16 or 17-year-old, and some incident happened at school, and the child was arrested on campus at school. And so all that mom knows is that she got a phone call that her son was at this station. They needed to come get him. So in me asking questions, let's just call Joe, Joe, what happened when the police came? Well, they put me in the car. Well, how did they put you in the car? Well, they put handcuffs on me. Well, where were the handcuffs? They were behind me. So how did they get you in the car? Well, they pushed me down. Oh, so now I'm asking these tiny little closed-ended questions. Mediation, you just want to be open-ended questions. So I'm asking
Right.
tiny little closed-ended questions to get the scenario painted so
Right.
that the child can process some of the trauma that they've had, as well as the parent here, because the parent only knows that I had to pick you up from the police station. What's going on? But what was that what was that experience? Even if your child caused some kind of harm, they still have had this highly, highly traumatic experience happen.
Yeah.
So taking it tiny, tiny little steps to let that sort of open up and land for everybody. In situations where minors are involved and you're doing mediation work, taking it slow and taking smaller closed-end questions to allow them to sort of expose the story. You might have a minor who's very talkative, but my experience is that typically isn't the case. But you want kind of the incidents exposed so that everybody can understand that this wasn't just an incident that happened where the child did something, then the child was also went through their own experience, which has then had impact on them, which then impacts the whole family, because then you get to turn to mom and say, so mom, did you know that this is how this happened for your child?
Right.
No. Well, that's good to hear that, right? It's good to
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah. Because now you You might still be really angry that something happened, that Joe decided to um, make a choice that maybe wasn't the best. But just hearing the impact on the child as well, right? Or the minor. Yeah, I would imagine that would hit you emotionally and make the whole interaction more human, I guess.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to do. This whole time this mediation is trying to get people to that place where their most authentic self is able to be present and express what's going on and how they have been impacted.
Mhm.
And that's mom's opportunity to say to the child, you know, what it was like to receive this phone call in the middle of my workday that you were at a police station, so then you can kind of unpack
Yeah.
that a little bit with the mom so the kid can see that their actions have a residual effect. I mean, we don't even necessarily have the person that was harmed in on this mediation. This could just be between the parent and the child.
Right.
There's still value in it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, cracking that window open so everybody gets to see everybody else's perspective a little bit more clearly would be super helpful. Yeah. Do you have anything else you'd like to share about framework for conflict resolution? You mentioned the organization that people can reach out to if they are needing a mediator's help. Is there anything more that you would like to share with us just for the average person and maybe their day to day?
I think this idea, there's this little expression BIA, BIA in the mediation world, and oftentimes we have we have an incident, right? But we have before the incident, that's the B, then we have the incident, then we have the A, which is the after the incident. So
Uh-huh.
if we can think about our conflicts as the BIA, what was it like before? And then
Uh-huh.
the incident happened. People come into mediation and they want to convince the mediator that they're right. I don't care what the incident was. Like, I know
Uh-huh.
you need to unpack it and we'll unpack it and all of that,
Uh-huh.
but okay, that
Right.
was the incident.
Right.
And then after things have changed, this is what it's like now. So we've got our BIA, but then let's go to the next step. And then what is the future? What do you want it to look like?
Mm.
So if you know how things were before, and then we had this incident, and then this is how things have changed, this is the after. But where would I like it to go? So you
Mm.
really want your thoughts to be future focused because you're not necessarily going to repair the harm that was done, but you can decide that you're going to create a plan to move forward that acknowledges potential harms that occurred or damages that were done,
Uh-huh.
but gives everybody sort of a goal. Like we can be looking to the future, and this is what I want it to look like. This is what I would like it to look like. What would you like it to look like? Okay, these are our visions. Now, how do we get there?
Mm. That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. The moving forward, moving through all those stages, but then looking to the okay, now what do we want it to look like?
Yeah, yeah, to sit and just rehash the conflict, okay, yeah, we can do that, but what's the point of that? Well, because we want the future to look different. We always want to have a future component to our conflict because everybody wants to be right, but this isn't
Mhm.
about being right. It's about wanting to be able to be in this relationship, whether it's a personal relationship, a work relationship, whether it's a vendor, whatever it is, you want to be able to be in it and be okay. So what
Mhm.
does the future look like and what steps do we have to take to get there?
Yeah. Why do you think that's such a human need to be right? Why do we always feel the need to be right, I wonder?
I think it gives us validation. And I actually say this in my opening when I'm doing a session. I tell parties that you don't have to convince me of anything. I believe everything you have to say.
Right.
And what you're both saying can be at complete odds with it. That's absolutely fine because we are not here to actually figure out what happened there. We're
Right.
here to figure out how you can go forward. So we were talking about kind of the conflicts are happening, and then we've got to stay more future focused. And we don't necessarily deal with the conflict until we feel that pinch, right?
Uh-huh.
But every person approaches conflict differently, but we all have some similarities in our conflicts and how we approach them. And this has been a topic that has been explored by researchers, and the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument has been developed, and it identifies 5 different conflict mode styles, right? So if you think about conflict as degrees of cooperation and degrees of assertiveness, a person who is the least cooperative and the least assertive would have an avoiding conflict style, right?
Mm.
They
Yep.
just want to avoid it. They don't want to deal with it. And a person that is not assertive but is cooperative would be an accommodating conflict style. Sure, I'm going to go along. It's going to be fine. Everything is going to be good. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. Just going to go along. Okay. Then we have the one that is very high on the assertion scale, but low on the cooperation scale, and that's a competitor, the competitive conflict style.
Right.
Everything is a win and lose, right?
Mhm.
And then on the very edge of both extremes of cooperation and extremes of assertiveness, we have collaborative because we believe in what we want, but we're not afraid to express it, but we're also willing to cooperate together. So we have this collaborative style. And then the one in the middle that kind of combines all of them is the compromising, because you can be all over the board on a compromising style. I wanted to share these because nobody is just one of them. We are all of them. We default to a particular style that is our instinctual style when we're under stress.
Mm.
That doesn't mean we can't be differently or we can't behave differently, right? Because every style has a benefit
Mhm.
and a detriment.
Right.
So for the avoiding conflict can be great because the issue isn't that important, because the person doesn't mean anything to you, because you just don't have the time. But if you avoid and avoid and avoid and avoid, and the person is important or the topic does have meaning to you, then you will have a greater sense of dissatisfaction and probably have just a blow up or a complete shutdown.
Right.
So your listeners can actually go online and look for this Thomas Kilmann conflict mode, and they can take their own little personal assessment and see where they fall on that, and know that under stress, you're going to default to your dominant conflict style, but you can choose any point to behave differently, to manage that conflict differently.
We'll include a link for that as well.
Okay.
Very interesting. Do you have in your career over the last decade a particular case or mediation experience that was particularly rewarding for you? Obviously, you can only share the details that you can share, but was there anything that stand out as like, wow, I really felt like I was helpful or
I had a case in which one party did not want to even be in the same room with the other party. And
Mm,
given the place that I was mediating, they have a process and a procedure that I had to work within, and because there's different mediations, they're called shuttle mediations, where I could have moved in between the different people, but that wasn't the model of this place that I was working. And so I worked with the party and we came up with a strategy, and I positioned the chair so that the party only had to look at me and never had to look at the other person. I also had like a signal, a little safe sign that if they needed a break without having to ask for the break, they could give me the signal and I would know to
mm,
send a break. So this person didn't have to appear more vulnerable or whatever. And, my goal was to create the safest space possible for this person to be able to express what was important to them as well as for the other side. This was not just for one side. It's just that the other
sure.
side was not feeling as vulnerable. And as the mediation went on, the person, instead of having their chair directly towards me, kept on shifting their chair. And by the middle of the session, they had their chair turned and they were pointing directly at the other party, speaking directly to them. And to me, that was a win of all wins.
Oh, for sure. For
Yeah.
them just to feel um that I guess safe. That's probably the word I would say. That's safe, right? Because they clearly didn't at the beginning. So they felt heard, they felt safe, they felt like they could express themselves. Yeah, I could see how that would be extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can also imagine how difficult that could be on you as the mediator. I'm sure you are privy to many, many challenging and probably, I was going to say horrific stories. Some of them could be on that level. What do you do to protect yourself emotionally?
Yeah, I think when you first begin this work, every case feels just you feel so responsible, right? You
Yeah.
feel so responsible. Did I do the best job? Did I do this, did that? And um, over time, for me, I'll only speak for me. It just became clear that none of this is mine. These are not my monkeys. This is not my circus.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say that, but I got my own monkeys. They just don't have to be these,
Yeah.
you know? And that kind of approach allows me to focus more on the craft and the skill that I bring versus the emotional drama that they're living in. And while I have great compassion for the situations that these parties are in, um, it's not mine. Like it's easy. It's easier for me to say it's not mine.
Yeah.
It- I don't know if that's just because that's who I am, or if that's just something that you build up over time. But it's not my stuff, you know.
And your response is almost verbatim what Lindsay's response was. Lindsay's a trauma therapist, and we did an interview back in the fall. And that's what she said too. I didn't cause any of this trauma for my client, and all I can do is help the best that I know how, and to try to know that the separation is that this is my work and this is not my personal life.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and then probably do a lot of cardio or something to relieve the stress. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very intense experience in a mediation. And then in my mind, when it's over, it's like it's almost never happened.
Hmm.
Because I'm so focused. I'm working. One of the things I didn't talk about in terms of skills that you can use in trying to manage conflict is really active listening skills, right? Trying to pay attention to all the communication that is happening, not just the words, but the tone, how they are said, the underlying innuendos that are in there. And so there's for the mediator, you're burning a lot of energy just trying to extract things. And so
Right.
when it's over, it's like it never even happened sometimes because you've worked so hard and you're like, that's gone.
And so are you like taking notes as you're, asking these questions to keep everybody's not story straight because, it's their responses, but if you've got 12 people in the room and, and you're asking everybody to tell their side of the story, are you having to keep notes on that?
Try not to take a lot of notes because if you're actively taking notes, you're not actively listening.
Right.
Right. And so I will write down key things that I hear. What I will write down more is words that are out of the normal language of the person. An example is gentleman, landlord, tenant case, and gentleman is talking, and all of a sudden he says his house is a sanctuary. And he went on and on. Sanctuary. Write that one down. Like
Mm.
that was not a word that he had been using for the last 30 minutes. And all of a sudden, that's not a word that you hear all the time. So
Right.
that was a piece of language that is loaded to me that needed to be unpacked. So I'm listening for that and I
Right.
write it down and I don't stop him in the middle and say, wait, like, oh, let me figure out. I'm going to go back. You said earlier you mentioned your house is a sanctuary. Can you talk more about that?
Right. Right.
So I'm writing down things like that are standing out in my mind, but that's my mediator brain. That's taken a few years to get that. They stand out in my mind, so I want to go back to them.
Right.
Or if I am hearing an emotion come out, I will write it down and then try and come back to it.
Right.
So I use my notes as places for where I want to go back to. And
Right.
then I doodle. Which is the good part about Zoom because I can doodle, but that keeps my hand is going, but my brain is working really hard.
Well,
And
yeah.
to do
Yeah.
that when you're together, that's not very professional.
They're like, what are you drawing over there?
Yeah.
Aw. Well, Linda, I'm so appreciative of the time that you've spent with us today. On the show, Meg and I do like to ask a question of our guests at the end. Is there anything that you're redesigning in your life right now? Oh, which reminds me, you shared your word with us for 2026. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to talk about my word actually, because
Yeah.
I actually thought long and hard about that. And because of the way our lives are right now, my husband and I, we are traveling a lot. And the idea of maintaining some sort of a healthy regiment, physical regiment to stay
Mhm.
strong and fit and active becomes important when you're doing a lot of traveling. That's where calisthenics came from. And, but I think that idea of strength and beauty together, I like taking that into everything, because I want to feel strong in the things that I do. And if I'm not feeling that strong, I want to also be okay about that.
Yeah.
So, it's not about having to power through everything. It's just acknowledging, where does your own personal power and strength come from? How can you use it in this situation? And if you're not feeling it at the moment or at the day or in this circumstance, being okay and giving space to that. You know, that's it for me.
Strength is a loaded word, right? Because there's physical strength and emotional strength and mental, like all the things. And so, we could only imagine what you meant by that. And same with beauty, right? Inner beauty, outer beauty. As Meg mentioned, like natural beauty. Can you clarify for us what you meant by strength and beauty for you?
Um, I think as a woman 62 years old, maintaining physical strength is
Hmm.
really important.
Yeah.
Um, So for me, on some levels, that really meant physical strength, building up my muscles. I've always been athletic.
Hmm.
I've always been fairly strong, but I've seen it decrease. So I think in aging, you need strength.
Yeah.
So I want to work on that, and I want to do it through a beauty of movement.
Mm.
There's a quality of movement that I'd like to have, and I'd like the strength to come through that. I don't want to be at the gym pounding weights like I used to. I want to figure out how to use my own body and everything that I have to build my own strength.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and being our first guest
Oh,
in 2026. And we appreciate you coming by. And thanks to everybody who listened today. And we will see you next time.
thanks, Kara. It's my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Redesigning Health and Home podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to like, share, and follow along so you can catch us on all future episodes. You can find me, Meg, at Fit, Fed, Feeling Good on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And you can find me, Carrie, on my website at homestylewithcarrie.com and on Instagram and Facebook at Homestyle with Carrie. That's Kerri. And you can find both of us at Redesigning Health and Home on Instagram and Facebook. So join us next time for more inspiration on creating a home and a lifestyle that truly supports your best health.